just take a minute to kind of pull back our chairs and fluff our feathers and think about where we've been today. And one of the things that seems to me as you, having been privy to the Alliance results and seeing what your first cut was, is there's remarkable similarity in what you think some of the differences are. I mean, what you think some of the critical problems and issues are. I think you'll be surprised at the one that they put a little higher than we did. The other is what are the common themes and problems and issues that are running through all of this? Anyone care to venture some observations or comments on some marketing? Okay. All right, and that's recruitment and image and policy development, support, and so on. Good. Okay. Retention, yeah, good. More concern for students, trying to improve graduation rates. It would appear that you feel comfortable, and I think appropriately so, with the advancing technology and the technology focus and emphasis. I think appropriate in a very good niche within the system of higher ed. I think that is a good niche. Any others that...
the human element.
Yeah. The soft issues throughout, HRD, faculty development, caring, participative management, decision processes, caring about students, family, all those things are coming through. Any surprises? Anything that kind of surprised you that, again, these are first cut and we'll have a chance to kind of refine them and focus them a little more tomorrow, hopefully. Any surprises?
Did you expect there to be surprises?
Well, I don't have the institutional background, you say, so I don't know what expectations you have. And I guess on the surprises issue, that might be in terms of process or perhaps the product or the points that were made.
I know that for me, in the process, it was very hard to talk about, for me to determine what I would eliminate. Or, that was difficult for me to look at and say, okay, if I could get rid of something to help improve something, what would I do?
Mm-hmm. I guess, too, if there's any lesson, perhaps, in all of this, is to demonstrate how complex strategic planning is for a public institution like the one you're affiliated with, and the range of issues and concerns that impinge on it. And of course, central to that is positioning within the higher ed system, interface with the parent campus, and then of course, teasing out an optimal role or interface with the low-tech system. I thought the emphasis on employers was right on. What do you think about the covenant? What problems or concerns do you see there? The competency-based approach, things of that sort.
I think we're headed that way.
I think it's
Current.
mandatory, yeah.
Pretty non-traditional for higher ed, though.
University of Houston, I think, has some programs going in that way. Some teacher ed programs have gone this way. Yeah, generally professors don't like to be accountable. Having spent 25 years at a Big Ten university. What's going to be the toughest part to pull off? As you kind of see the shape of the plan emerging. What's going to be the toughest part to pull off?
I think part of it is trying to be accepting who we are rather than what we see ourselves. Accepting who we are instead of what we wish we were.
I think the hardest part is going to be making the assessment of student performance, which I see as a big issue, and then who they are coming in and who they are going out, and did we change them in the meantime?
Value added.
And making that whole situation, that whole process simplified enough where it doesn't eat our lunch, where it does not usurp the time that we
Consume us.
need to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
instructing them and so forth.
Yeah.
To make it a routine that's so mechanical and working on its own that it doesn't kill us time-wise.
What would you think of the prospects that if agency funding might be available to run a intense summer session that preceded your fall session to get people up to speed on the basis of the new active place test that would show reading deficiency or math deficiency or study skills, and try to get them up to where they could start on the regular semester and not have deficiencies and zero courses. Is that worth a go? Bob, do you have questions out of the day? You've seen more of the cards than some of us, and any questions you'd like to put to the group?
Well, the one issue that I think came up in several different ways was the notion of professional faculty development, human resource development. How do we cope with the changing technology and keeping current technically, and also for what maybe the non-technical faculty, professional development of some of the goals of dealing with infusing more critical thinking, more problem solving, dealing with ethics. How do we, as an institution, how are we going to get ourselves organized to really do that in a meaningful way? Because my belief is that the 2 or 3 day in service before fall term begins is not productive and basically is a waste of time by and large. And that professional development needs to be handled in a different way, in an ongoing way, and quality came up several times in a number of different issues. How do we get that, and how do we bring the level of development of everyone, not only faculty, but the non-faculty people? How do we make that process work internally?
I think
Things
one of
like,
that is a personal commitment on each individual's part to stay on top of what is going on in their particular field and what is going on in their particular area. And I know that that's hard to communicate as a supervisor. I want you to be personally committed to staying on top of what's going on. But I think that's where it starts, is that personal commitment. And then offering some opportunities for them for at least as myself as a supervisor, I said offering some opportunities for my staff to stay on top, but also demonstrate to them that I have a personal commitment on my part to stay on top.
well, too, in some of these areas, like the matter of ethics and all, you're not going to get that done with a week in a given course. That's something that's got to permeate the entire institution and just get reinforced and supported across the board. What was your general yeah?
On that, keeping technically up to date, I think an area that we don't do is tied back in with what they learn at Gen Ed. We teach them to do report writing such as that, but then we don't stress it in different departments. If the students were required to do more research and paper writing and in-class reporting on the technology changes, the instructors would have to read the papers, and that would help the instructors keep up, at the same time benefiting the students in their writing skills.
Steve?
Yeah, because ideally, I think that the implication is that a lot of the general ed skills need to be reinforced in the technologies. By the same token, a lot of the examples and exercises and applications in the general ed need to be drawn from the technology to make that. What was your general reaction to the oversimplistic curricular strategy of trying to look at sequence and to see if there are something like core or foundations, trying to build a little more efficiency into the curriculum and at the same time have that as a base strategy for adding new programming?
I have a comment maybe about curriculum. You said earlier, was there anything that surprised us? And I was a little bit surprised, and maybe it was because the questions weren't structured in a certain way. The length of our program of study or an associate degree is certainly unusual.
Yes.
And if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to be offering what it is we need to be offering, is that something that we ought to be taking a look at? Is that something we ought to stay with, take a change, or what? Is it worth it to the student to come in and spend 90 credit hours with us to get an associate degree? Cost is going up.
And does that extra 30 hours pay off in the marketplace? Yeah. Do you want to comment on that at all, Bob, in terms of plans? Or?
Yeah, Mike, because that is a question that we have to answer. As Tom pointed out, it does mean several things to the student. One is it means more time on campus. It means more cost in terms of credit hours paid for, and delays them entering the labor market, so therefore giving them some potential income. And we need to find out, verify whether or not that investment is worth it. And one of the plans that we have, and Dr. Taylor's going to provide some assistance on that, is utilize the services of the IRS to follow up on graduates. What we have to do is provide the Social Security number, and we can get that information on cells that have at least 5 or more individuals in them.
Not by name, but just by
right.
category.
And so we can go back whatever number of years that we want, and when we contract and get that information. And then I think there are enough studies out there of typical associate degrees at junior community colleges, and then we can compare 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, what the income level of our students are. And that will be, I guess that'll be valid data. I was going to say more valid, but that'll be valid data in that if you survey students or if you survey people, they have a tendency to either inflate their income or inflate their benefits, and you
Not answer.
or not answer, and not get a real accurate picture of that. But if you do it in an unobtrusive fashion, and one that is probably as verifiable as anything that I know of, you'll get accurate information on that. Because one is, if there's no advantage, if the investment doesn't provide any return, then Tom, we need to do something. Now, if the investment does provide a return, then we have one doggone good marketing issue to say that you're spending a little more and it's taking a little bit more time. But this is what has happened to graduates that have been out there 5 years. And the other thing that I think we may want to take a look at are those non-completers. Dr. Taylor's mentioned that Joan's looking at some data, and can't remember the exact statistics, but like out of 350 non-completers, seemed to be like, was it 104, 140, Joan, or something, I can't remember. Over 100 were 3.0 to 4.0 students. And about essentially half of the pool was 2.0 or above, making satisfactory progress. Well, there's several things that we need to look at those non-completers. One is recruiting them to come back and complete. First of all, we need to know what their goal was when they came, and whether or not that goal changed. And then, if maybe they only came to get a certain amount of courses and they didn't intend to complete. But also what their income, and we can take a look at that, and that might also tell us something particularly about the business industry linkage to continuing education, the non-traditional student, some of that.
Let me make a point that builds on this, and that is that one of the things that you need to consider is if, for example, this last 30 hours does not appear to pay off, is it may not be that you and your graduates are negotiating appropriately for starting wages that reflect that extra level of training and competence. And that's why you need the career passport, the verified competencies, the thing to be able to distinguish your graduates on the basis of performance. And clearly, one of the things we have an obligation to do as part of that competence is to negotiate appropriate starting wages that reflect the level of training and the competence and proficiency. We did a study at Ohio State, a national study. For example, we found that vocational graduates were more productive on the basis of units produced, supervisory ratings, and test scores. They required less on-job training, and they were productive at the 13 to 15% level higher, but were only rewarded 6% more. And so that digs a hole for an institution that's preparing them. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. I've done quite a bit of work in curriculum, studying other schools with related programs similar to mine. And I find that you cannot compare a 60-hour program to a 90-credit-hour program across the board. You've got to look at it curriculum by curriculum. Because some of the 60-hour programs you look at, the first math course is calculus. So it means the student actually spends 2 years before he even gets into the program to develop that. So some of the schools, I've seen 60-hour schools with equivalent subject matter, higher level subject matter to what we offer.
That's a good point.
But they started out 2 years earlier.
That's a good point.
And I would caution that we look at that when we look at these programs.
But there was another point made earlier, and that was during the break, a perceptive member of the group came up and commented on the covenant and the employer deal. And the observation was that our employers are not ready, do not understand the benefits and values. And it means that this institution is going to have to lead out, initiate that conversation, talk about it, lay out what the prospects and opportunities are, and literally train employers to know how to work with you and how to benefit from your program in their own plan.
And this is probably an ideal time in the history of the world of work to do that.
You have their attention, because they're hurt and they don't want to have to pay for training twice. They're paying for it as a taxpayer, and if they don't have and utilize and build on what you have, or you don't do the job, then they got to pay for it anyway.
Have you experienced, folks in the tech programs, have you experienced that your employers are willing to do some additional interaction?
I'd say only to a limited degree, and probably I use Steve Doty's program in, say, Toyota, where it's an internship, and that's a significant partnership with industry. And during the 6th and 7th term, the students are on campus, they're in that internship. And Steve, you've forgotten the negotiated price that interns get. Could you explain that just a little bit in terms of with Toyota?
Well, it's a flat hourly rate, so that we don't put them in competition with technicians. So it's like $5 an hour for a clock hour as opposed to a flat rate hour.
Yeah, and then they get increases so during the time.
They get increases, and the Ford program's the same way. They get 50 cents an hour for each internship. And of course, they go through 6 internships.
So I think that dialogue is opening up.
And it's with some.
Yes, it's certainly not across the board. But,
your advisory groups, some of them have this kind of interaction with others.
Yeah, and the thing that I remember about Toyota, and I wasn't in on the Nissan Ford discussion, but the Toyota field people or the regional people just said to employers, when they came in and we were developing that partnership, you need to pay for these people, and you need to be a part of this internship, and we expect that. And the Toyota people, the dealerships, my perception was they were eager to do that because they can't find technicians. And I think that we have that opportunity to do that in every program setting, really, over a period of time.
I remember being in a 24-nation conference in West Berlin where the Austrian delegate observed that industry was planning in terms of decades for products, but only planning by months and a few years for personnel, and that they needed to extend their personnel planning in the same sense that they were extending their product plan. I think there are some promising developments. The other is the potential of negotiating for sabbatic or internships for instructors, return to industry programs, where perhaps we could negotiate a half salary, a quarter, half of that go to the instructor for displacement costs to be there, the other quarter to the department for incentives for fill-in or substitutes. We need to begin to push in that, and a lot of people, a lot of industries across the country are beginning to think about the value, like American Airlines willing to bring some of their people down here to teach in the avionics program so that, one, they're sure that people coming out of that can do the tasks that they need, at the same time establish a relationship and have a chance to hire. And the same would be true if they created a 6 months position within the company for instructor to go back and work there and update them. Those are the kind of connections and leads that we do. And I just have to say that there's probably no other more critical path than the matter of building a working relationship with employers. And to get specific and serious and talk about competence and performance and reward and linkages and those kind of things.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught all what Dr. Taylor said about the instructor return to industry, but I think he really has, we've talked about that ever since I've been in administration, and we've never really figured out a way to do it. And I think that concept that he explained in terms of how industry might make a contribution and we might have some for displacement.
Quid pro quos.
And bring some of that other money back to pay faculty for overload during it. Could really be, Bob Coyle and I had a chance to test that just a little bit with Williams Company the other day. Is it Williams, is that right? They were talking about student interns, but also then we brought up faculty interns. And they were at least saying, we really want to talk about that.
Good, that's excellent. Some of the Idaho community colleges have provisions for that now, not necessarily the one that I described. Some go on the basis of institutional support. But I really think that's a very workable and viable option. One of the things too that may not be apparent, and that is as I have visited with each of you, I think with maybe one or at the most 2 exceptions, I've had some sense of what was going to show up here today. And we've tried, as well as my own analysis, tried to anticipate what data requirements are. And of course, one is the burden of proof on the program length in terms of labor market advantage and payoff. The other, of course, is the matter of being able to profile successful students and those that do not complete, and to try to develop a predictive database that would allow us to do a better job of recruitment and admission and being responsive. We hope to have for you tomorrow an estimate of the percentage of students that drop out during or at the end of the first semester. I suspect that if we were to graph that, it's going to look like that. That most of the ones that we don't salvage happen in the first semester, which says something then about front loading and trying to be successful with all students during that first semester. Bob and the people have been pushing toward the AccuPlace test that will give a great deal more diagnostic information on incoming students with respect to achievement levels and areas where they may need specific training and reinforcement at the front. The whole matter of strengthening the placement system. A chance to make more database decisions and to get feedback from institutional assessment on things that are happening. For example, to what degree is the ACT now predictive of success, and does that vary by program? And individual program data as well as institutional data. So I really think that some things are coming together here that are going to be quite helpful and quite supportive.
Yeah. Personally, I think that's our biggest problem is retention. We can talk about a lot of other things, but retention is based on quality instruction and caring faculty and things like that. And I think, to me, retention is our #1 problem. It is in my department. If we kept all the students that enrolled in our department, our enrollment would be good. I don't know what the word good means there, but it would be better than it is. And to me, retention is the biggest problem we have. And whether it be dissatisfied students, problems at home, financial problems, or whatever, somehow we've got to address what all those reasons are and try to attack those reasons. Some of them are probably social issues, maybe, I don't know.
Not non-achievement, right. Yeah.
To me, that's our biggest problem.
The other thing I think that we'll find too as we delve into that is that part of this, I think there's a second covenant in addition to the institutions and the employers, and that is the covenant between an incoming student and the institution. And part of that recruitment and enrollment and admission process needs to clarify expectations. Clarify expectations in terms of what are the institutional and program requirements, what's expected of you, and what is it the student wants, and to be sure there's a goodness of fit. And if there isn't a goodness of fit, then you're probably doomed to fail. We're also looking at internal transfers that are not huge, but not insignificant either, to see what might be done to be sure the student gets in the right program at the time. Okay, I think our group has arrived, and I'm not going to tell any airplane tonight, I swear. Why not? Okay, thank you again. I was telling the small group of you, Ohio State operates an airport. We have an instructor training program and about a 4,500 foot runway. And one morning a TWA 707 pulled up to the tower, 14 miles away from Columbus International. And they took all the passengers, drained all the fuel, but a limited amount, took out the seats, the baggage, stripped it, and brought in the head pilot from Kansas City to fly it out. And I don't think the guy that landed it is flying yet. I think they really bombed it. And then Frontier landed a plane in Wyoming, 36 miles from the airport in northern town. Delta put one down at Lexington that was supposed to be somewhere else up in Kentucky. And so I guess that happens, you know.
Talking about Northwestern getting lost.
But
Texas. Run will take off.
I've always heard any landing you walk away from is a good one.
When you
Yeah.
say hang on left at the next runway, that's getting pretty bad.
people in white shirts and ties and
To your right. You could get that way.
I already finished it. I'm just finding out the thing.
The work session, let me introduce the three people that are going to be spending time with us in terms of making this presentation. First, we have Gary Smith, Executive Vice Chancellor for the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education. You might just hold up your hand, Gary. Okay, and then we have Dr. Roy Peters. Roy is the State Director of Vocational and Technical Education, and I think most of you have had the opportunity to meet him. And then Dr. Campbell, President of Oklahoma State University, and I know all of you have had the opportunity to meet Dr. Campbell at one time or the other. And we're very pleased that they could make it. They took the round trip. Just wanted to explore a little bit more of Oklahoma this afternoon. But when you get the three highest education officials together in the state of Oklahoma, why they were lost. They got lost. It was a while. I thought maybe they were on that Mexicana airline. I was on that, and I got on it in Mexico City, coming to El Paso, and it was just kind of open, and the pilots were open. There weren't any doors or anything, and the pilot radioed the tower, and he said, "Can we take off?" And the tower said, "Yep, I don't see anything. Go ahead and take off." So they took off, and we were in the air about an hour, and we lost one of the jet engines. And we noticed the pilot and the co-pilot talking to one another. And then pretty soon the pilot turned the plane over to the co-pilot. And the pilot got up and he put the parachute on and started walking back through us. And he said, "No, don't worry, I'm going down to get help." So anyway, first we want Executive Vice Chancellor Gary Smith to talk with us about the state regent's plan for academic quality and implications of the new APRA that they have announced, and what that means to institutions, and what our responsibilities are in working with the state regent's staff and implementation of that. And I think that we discussed a number of issues that lead into that this afternoon. But we're not going to spend much time on introductions because we have these three officials here, and we're very pleased with that, and we want to gain as much and glean as much insight from them as we can this afternoon. Gary?
Thank you, Bob. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and obviously you can see that I'm not Chancellor Grish. He did ask me to send his regrets that he couldn't be here. Still kind of green after getting off that plane. We're getting real good at getting him out of that thing. And I promised I wouldn't make any jokes about this, but I think Peters is the one Dr. Campbell needs to worry about. What happened to us?
I got to get it right back.
What happened to us was truly make a real good Aggie joke. I think it's appropriate. First of all, what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and talk about a planning process that the state regents staff are getting ready to undertake with the institutions. I'd like to take a few minutes and kind of let you know what all is going to be involved in that, so you'll have some idea of what the role of the institution is going to be and what the role of the state regents is going to be. And I think it's probably very appropriate to that we are discussing planning. And it was, in fact, it was at the last meeting in June, the state regents directed that a plan to achieve excellent efficiency in higher education be formulated to bring about the objectives as outlined in their 18-point plan for excellence and efficiency. I know that we're going to be interested in reviewing the results of your planning exercise, because as Bob said, I think obviously we're going to have a lot of commonality in what we're going to be doing with you and what you're doing here today. And what we are doing really is just in the process and we're finalizing what I call a blueprint for the planning process, which I think now has come to be known as the academic planning and resource allocation process, or we refer to that as APRA. Planning is probably nothing new for many of you who've been in higher education. It's nothing new to the state regents. We've had the plan for the 60s, we had the plan for the 70s, plan for the 80s, and now we're getting ready to enter into the, I guess, the equivalency of the plan for the 90s. It's interesting, I look back over these planning exercises, what the objectives were, and it's really interesting because a lot of the objectives are still valid today that came out in those plans. And in some instances, there hasn't been a whole lot of progress that's made relative to some of the points. In fact, the 18-point document, 18 points of light, I guess that's what we call it, the regents recently adopted, it still encompasses many of those objectives. Well, you might ask the question, what differentiates this new planning process that we're getting ready to implement over the previous ones? I think you might say that if not much progress, or not a whole lot of progress was made in implementing the objectives of the earlier plan. Why do we think this process that we're going to undertake is going to be more successful? And I think probably the answer is twofold. One, the process we're going to undergo will result in institutional defined priorities, and probably just as important is our intention that resource allocation or institutional funding will be linked to funding programs of high priority which fit the objectives of the academic plan of the institution. What could we say would be the impetus of initiating a planning process like this? I think there are two. One is funding. I think two is a need to validate the quality of our products, which is the academic programs and the services that we currently provide to our students. So I'm going to briefly address both of those motivators. As it relates to funding, I think if we're realistic about higher education's funding prospects for the 90s, I think at least some of us would agree it's just really not in the cards for us to make a whole lot of progress toward reaching what we call our goal in terms of this peer parity funding. In fact, I think probably we may be fortunate to match the rate of inflation over this decade. Continued tuition increases are going to be very difficult. I know we have a 6-year plan. We were able to realize the first year of that 6-year plan, but I think as President Campbell can attest to, it's going to be tough sledding over there next year in particular about going for another tuition increase. So we're not going to be able to rely on tuition increases to generate much money for the system. I think it's fair to say too that I personally don't believe we're ever in the 90s we're going to see a 1017 for higher education. And that's really the kind of initiative we need to take if in fact we're going to move significantly towards parity funding. Just to illustrate that, our calculations show right now that it would take about $300 million in order to move us to the average of how our programs are funded in comparison to the peer institutions. We also have about 2,000 degree programs and over 17,000 active courses being taught throughout our 34 institutions and constituent agencies. And we never have, and I don't believe we ever will, with the constraints and the funding resources we have, I don't believe we'll ever be able to fund all those programs at a parity, again, with our peer institutions. So our choices for attaining the kind of funding that we need are somewhat limited. I think it's a fair statement to say, too, that we do not look for the legislature to decide to close any institutions as a means of raising additional money to redistribute. I just absolutely don't think that's going to happen. And I believe that, obviously, I don't think the state of Regents would support that position anyway. So probably our best mechanism for attaining program quality and funding is going to be through a process of prioritizing and reallocation of existing resources at the institutional level. And that's not altogether a glamorous choice on the surface, and I guess if there's any consolation, we in Oklahoma are not the only ones facing that situation. I think if anybody of you have been reading the Chronicle, there's a recent article that reported that in the fiscal year we just ended, there were some 30 states that had fairly significant budget reductions in higher education. As we look at, as we see preliminary data as it relates to the current budget, in many of those states, their budgets were not even restored to the level that they were previously operating with before the cuts. I think many others will agree that the funding situation that higher education is facing throughout the states, I don't think that's a short-term problem. And I think it's causing nationally a rethinking of the relationship again between the public institution and the state government. in a recent Chronicle article I was reading the other day, the Chancellor of the Maryland system said that during the economic boom of the 80s, higher education had an opportunity to focus new resources in the most innovative and imaginative ways. Instead, he says, we use the new funds to create new, somewhat questionable programs without cutting out the old, outmoded, or mediocre, and today we're paying the price. Commissioner of Higher Education in Texas recently reported that in many states, including Texas, higher education is grossly overexpanded in comparison to what the state is willing to expend. Now the states are reducing support for higher education. College officials must scrap some programs or risk diluting the overall quality of their institutions. Indications of deterioration in some of these systems are already underway. The gentleman with the Arizona system says that reallocation is becoming more and more a hot topic. What colleges really need to do, and this really sounds elementary, they really need to prioritize. Edward Hines, a professor at Illinois State University, says many college presidents are trying to respond to the changing budget picture, but some are hampered by students and faculty members who believe that lobbying for more money will enable colleges to avoid serious cuts. And unless lobbying is very focused, simply more lobbying isn't going to do the job for higher education. Again, we talked about many of our states are looking for tuition increases as a way of generating additional revenue. In fact, many states, such as Texas, who historically had very low tuition policies, are totally rethinking that. And I know earlier we heard, and I haven't bothered to follow up, that they were talking about a doubling of the lower division rates at the university, at the Texas system. I think they had significant increases. I don't know exactly what those were. Chancellor of the Maryland system states that the university as an institution has withstood the test of time. It is one of the precious few institutions that have survived virtually intact since the Reformation. But that wonderful stability has become an encumbrance and an excuse to resist necessary change. Now that's just kind of an overview of what's happening at the national level. I don't think you can necessarily parallel that so much to Oklahoma. In fact, over the last 3 years in higher education, as you know, we've had 3 record years of funding. The only problem is we compare against the other systems, they were so much better off than we were to begin with. And so now I guess, as I told John coming over here and Dr. Peters, that our peer system funding may work simply because not so much that we're going to gain that much, it's because everybody else is going to come down. And that's probably how we're going to make any strides, particularly this next year. The second aspect, or second motivator for the planning process, I think is a need and maybe somewhat of concern over the quality of our institutional offerings and the academic product that we offer to our students. Nationally, since the early 80s, we've had presidential commissions, governors, business leaders, prominent educators, and others have issued a plethora of reports, studies, statements, and books decrying the adequacy of today's college graduate. I think the question we would ask is, do our academic programs and services, this may sound somewhat lofty, although I think it's appropriate, do our academic programs and services produce graduates that can demonstrate a superior level of competency in quantitative and qualitative reasoning? Do they possess the requisite general knowledge to participate as an informed citizen in a democratic society? Have they experienced sufficient exposure to a field of study to allow mastery of its distinctive mode of teaching? Beyond specific facts and specific skills, a well-structured degree program teaches habits of the mind that provides to graduates problem-solving skills that they will need in the 21st century, where it's predicted that college graduates will change careers 3 times and jobs 7 times. Can they display intellectual independence, which is the ability to substitute critical thinking for conventional wisdom, to distinguish between opinion and fact, and the confidence to take a position after examining its rationale critically. Finally, have they developed moral autonomy or the ability to distinguish right from wrong and their personal integrity to act upon that knowledge? So I think the challenge that we look at So we basically have 60, 90, or 120 credit hours, depending which program the student's in, to accomplish these kinds of characteristics in what we look for our students to have. I think that this constraint alone should force institutions to examine closely the array of courses offered to students that will produce a graduate with these characteristics. Now, in the time, few minutes we have left, I want to specifically address some of the aspects of our new academic planning resource allocation system that we referred to. And we believe that this new system will be structured to address both providing funding support to our programs of quality and improving the quality of programs we offer. I want to stress that what I want to talk about again and what I'll outline to you, and I have a handout to give to you, is really, again, kind of a roadmap or a blueprint of what is a developing planning process. And as you will see as I talk about this, that many of these specifics and the details will be worked out through the close interaction between the institutions and the state region staff. It's the institutions that will provide valuable insight and ideas which become incorporated in the final product. I think really to emphasize how important this process is in state regions, I think many of you may have heard recently that we have reorganized our office significantly. We now have a newly formed academic planning and resource allocation unit now within the state region's office. And really that combines the academic and physical functions into one division, primarily for the purpose to ensure that academics will drive the system. Academics is the priority, and for another reason, hopefully to achieve greater efficiency within our own operation. But in any case, we have structured the organization to meet the demands of the planning system and to enable more effective coordination and communication with our institutions. I think that's really a very key point. So what is the APRA planning system? Let me give you a definition of it. Well-grounded and sound academic principles. APRA is a multi-level, multi-purpose, highly structured, tightly integrated planning system that orchestrates academic planning, institutional and system decision-making, and information management. It's through the prioritizing of goals and objectives, APRA will allocate scarce resources to college-level courses that produce degree program graduates with skills and competencies to lead productive lives. And that's somewhat of a kind of a long drawn-out definition. And what does that really mean? And how do we intend to truly operationalize that definition? There are really four components of APRA. I've got it, and I want to show you talk about what these are and how they interact. But you're probably going to need some of these to kind of follow along. Or else I'll probably lose you. Okay, if you look at your handout, component one of the four components is the institutional academic plan. The academic plan of the institution consists of two parts. Part one is the narrative portion, which describes the objectives for the institution's graduates as well as the academic priorities. Part two is a list of the degree programs with various information about each program. And this will serve as our framework for arranging information about the institution's educational activities. Component two is what we refer to as the core academic activities, which include program review, new program approval, curricular requests, and requests for program changes. Component three is the annual, what we call the annual selected data report, and this report will be produced by our staff and will include such information such as five-year trend data on degrees conferred, Degree program headcount enrollment, student credit hours produced at the course level and the field of study, the average size of courses and sections by field of study, number of courses and sections offered on field of study, and a frequency distribution of the size of the section, and the student-faculty ratio by discipline. The last component is the thing that kind of undergirds the whole process, and that's what we call our academic planning database. It has really three components: the unitized data system, which many of you are familiar with, the degree program inventory, which we just have recently reviewed and validated, and the course inventory, which we're now in the process of building. Question now is, I think, how are these four components how are we going to utilize these components in order to meet our objectives? I think it's, the old saying goes, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And it's truly the dynamic interaction among the components of APRA that achieve the objectives of focusing resources on core activities, central to the mission of the institution in ensuring student success by providing quality courses and programs to prepare the students for a competitive and rapidly changing world. How do these components in and how are they going to interact? Okay, I'm going to explain some of the ways in which they do interact. You may have to use a diagram when I refer to component 1 doing this with 2 and 4 and whatever. I'll probably lose you, but if I do lose you, don't worry that much about it because there'll be a lot more information coming out on this. Okay, component 2, or core academic activities, must be evaluated in terms of component 1, which is the academic plan. More specifically, the decisions regarding which programs to offer, how to sequence course offerings, the range of offerings, and which areas to build depth and quality must be evaluated in terms of the distinguishing characteristics of the institution, its aspirations for its students, its academic priorities as contained in the institution's academic plan. Decisions made regarding component 2, which are the core activities, in terms of program review and those things, must be validated by analysis contained in component 3, which is the information that we'll generate through the annual report of selected data, which will provide a knowledge base for some of these decisions. And similarly, the institution's academic plan, which is component 1, when viewed in the context of the analysis contained in component 3, achieves a validity and a cogency it would otherwise lack. First three components are highly dependent upon component 4, which is the academic planning database. What may not be as obvious is how dependent component 4 will also be on the other components. What data is collected and how the elements are defined are two of the critical questions that can only be answered by knowing the issues raised in the academic plan. Decisions regarding core academic activities and the nature of the analysis and their interpretations contained in the annual report of selected data, which is in component 3. I think it's also, we'll probably also make a comment about funding and what we may look at there. Over the past 3 years, we've made a concentrated effort to truly de-emphasize the impact of FTE in the funding formula, and I think we've made some progress in doing that. However, with this system, we envision other significant changes as we attempt to ensure that the institution's strongest and most integral programs receive sufficient resources, and that scarce resources are not disproportionately devoted to marginal or tangential programs. The process will be closely aligned with the program review and the institution's academic plan. The past few years, we've worked very closely with the President's Council, particularly the President's Council Budget Committee. President Campbell's on that committee, in refining our budget process, the way in which we determine the budget need for the academic program. And we will continue to work very closely with that group and the President's Council as we move through this process and probably change some of our aspects of our funding in order to match some of the things we talked about. Having gone through this, I think it's very difficult for you, I think, for you to probably follow and picture how all these things are going to interact. So I want to try to put together or give you a very simple illustration of how this might work, and it is probably too simple and may generate more questions than I want. Let's assume that we have 10 programs, and let's say each of the programs were funded at the level of $1,000 each for $10,000. Through the linking of the academic plan to the objectives of the degree program, which are made explicit through the program review process, if it becomes evident, say, that 3 of these programs fall outside the prioritized academic priorities which are set forth in the academic plan, the decision then is made to discontinue these 3 programs. Okay, then the $3,000 that we were previously using, or the institution was using to fund those programs, now can be reallocated to the remaining 7 programs, which would thus increase the funding level from $1,000 to $1,430 in those programs remaining. That truly is kind of a simplistic reallocation example. And the same effect, though, I think that we will realize through the elimination of courses within a degree program that do not necessarily contribute to the objectives of the degree program, again, that are defined by the institution. We really believe that this system will be dynamic and will respond to the ever-changing environment. If it doesn't, any systems that can't do that or won't do that, then they become real dinosaurs, as we know, in 3 to 4 years. To avoid that fate, the academic plans will be viewed as development documents to be updated annually, and as plans mature, the priorities will change. Principal elements in component 2, which is the core activities, which are program review, new program approval, curricular changes, and program changes, will continue to reflect the thinking of the faculty and their academic officers regarding the subject matter to be taught. I'm not going to get into that business. Moreover, the elements in the academic planning database and the analysis that we generate through the annual report on selected data will be reviewed annually to ensure that these elements and their analysis continue to provide valuable information to the academic leadership and promote thoughtful and informed decision making. The thing in conclusion about APRA, the expected outcome of APRA is that resources will be more focused on core activities. Through APRA, the objectives of the institution, the degree programs, and the general education component and the courses supporting them will be clarified and linked to one another. Expected that the appreciation of these linkages and their interaction will allow decision makers at every level to focus limited resources on activities that are the most powerful in achieving the stated results of the institution's academic plan. One thing I can't not really overemphasize or stress is the planning process is highly interactive and participatory. And the institution will be the absolute key and principal player. It's the institution that must develop the academic plan, clearly state the goals and objectives of the institution and its programs before the components of APRA can begin to interact and work. Without that academic plan and those stated goals, objectives, and the components of the academic plan, I think I would probably refer to APRA as basically be a headless giant, as I refer to it, much ado about nothing. So each one of these components calls for extensive interaction between the institution and our staff. We've really already started a lot of this. We've been meeting with a lot of the academic officers off and on now for several weeks, going over the components of this, kind of test marking it. I know that Northeastern State University has basically taken this thing. They have already done a large part of their academic plan, and through that exercise they've already begun to do some of the things that APRA is going to do. And so far we've received very good support from the people that we've talked about, and we're very excited and about the prospects, and we hope to anticipate results from these. So that concludes my remarks about our planning system.
Thank you, Gary. again encourage you to make sure that you write down questions that you want to ask Gary when we have the panel discussion, because we're covering a lot of information. If you write it down as you go along, I think that we'll be able to recover those questions and deal with them during our panel discussion. I think Dr. Taylor said one thing this morning, that planning is for real, and it is. And I think when you hear what Gary said in terms of AFRA and the planning process that the state regents are going to engage in with the institutions of higher education in the state, it really drives that point home much harder, that planning is for real, and it's really incumbent upon us to do quality planning, and so that when we present whatever we're going to present to the state regents, it's something that we've thought through and that's sound, and it's well done, and we can stand up and support it, because it has a lot to do with priorities and reallocation of resources, which is very important to all of us. Next, we ask President Campbell to spend a little bit of time with us at this session in terms of talking about the relationship and how he views it of our campus in Okmulgee to the Oklahoma State University system, and probably the most important part of that is what is that long-term relationship, and how do we continue to be an integral part of the system and maintain our autonomy and uniqueness that we want to maintain within the Oklahoma system of higher education. When I was visiting with the president yesterday, I said we might, during the panel discussion, have some controversial issues or questions that we might like to have you deal with at that time. And he said, I haven't known when you people weren't controversial. So he's prepared for that, and that's one thing that the president is very open about is dealing with us on issues and questions and concerns that we have as a campus. And so, Mr. President, we're real pleased that you can be here this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and I want to say that we really tested our friendship with the VOTEC system and the state regents this afternoon. A lot of times when you have things like this happen, you know, you try to get a commitment out of these people early on before they really get out and start developing these stories and expanding them and embellish them and so forth. And I frequently say to a person in a deal like this, I won't tell about it if you won't. I couldn't get that kind of commitment. I don't know what Roy Peters is going to say, but he gave me a hint when he said, I'll wait till I get back home and then I'll start, because I need to ride back. So he's hoping that we get him back to Stillwater and not back to Tulsa or somewhere else. I'm not sure. But speaking of testing friendships, that reminded me of a story, and this is a true story, an experience that I had in Illinois that involved the word friend, and it goes like this. One of the things I did in the college was put together a major merit scholarship program. And we recruited a young man from Southern Illinois who had a 29 ACT, Gary, that meet our admission requirements, and had graduated second in his high school class, a fairly large class. His mother was a teacher, and all the way, K through 12, and probably even before K, she had really came down on him pretty hard about how important education was and how important it was to study, make good grades, and do well, and so forth. And he'd performed well. Well, he got to the university, and all of a sudden there's no mother to look after him and to make him study each night and make sure he got his reports in and everything's all okay to keep his grades on the course. And at the end of the first semester, his grades were bad, really bad. And so we put him on probation. So we had this kind of provision where we give him a second chance the first year. So we gave him the second opportunity, but we called him in and said to him, you're on probation, and if you don't deliver the second semester, obviously that's it. And to help him hopefully keep on course, I asked him to come in once a week and give me a progress report so that I'd have some notion about exams he was taking and how well he was doing, and papers that were due, did he get them in, all that sort of thing. And I noticed that as the semester wore on, he got a little slower, a little more, these weeks got a little longer, between before I got my reports in, and I wasn't sure. Well, at the end of the second semester, his grades were just really, they were disaster. And he put little 3 to 5 cards on a bulletin board all around campus, said books for sale. used very little and grades to prove it. Well, that was a signal, see what had happened to this young man. So I called him in and I explained to him, that we had counseled him at the end of the first semester. We give him a second chance, but we've done that now, and he was out. And so the University of Illinois had a policy that if you didn't make the grades when you went on probation like that, that you couldn't be readmitted for at least one full year. If you find another institution that would accept you and go ahead and continue your education, that's fine, but you couldn't get back there for a year. And he left in a rather nonchalant, non-caring type of mode, and I didn't know if I'd ever see the guy again. Well, that summer, he worked in a service station, pumping gas and changing tires and whatever you do around a service station. Don't change tires much anymore, I guess, but you got longer life ones. But anyway, this happened, and I expect he skinned his knuckles a few times, and he got to think about it. The Big U was a pretty nice place, and this was not going to get him where he wanted to go, the service station. So he decided to appeal the process. You appreciate this. And he wrote me a letter. And this is a true story. I still have this letter. Here's what the letter said. I can resurrect it and show it to you. Dear Dean Campbell, history has recorded how during the Civil War, soldiers convicted of military crimes would write to President Abraham Lincoln requesting presidential pardon. One day, a letter arrived on President Lincoln's desk. Well, excuse me. It's been a while since I told the story. Accompanying those letters to the president would be additional letters from very influential people. Now, Gary and I know what this, Roy, we all know what this means, but we get a lot of those letters from VIPs. One day, a letter arrived on President Lincoln's desk with no accompanying letters of support. What? Said President Lincoln to his presidential aide. Doesn't this soldier have any influential friends? Obviously, Mr. President, he does not. Ah, said President Lincoln, that I shall be his friend and granted presidential pardon. Paragraph 2. Dean Campbell, sir. I need a friend. Now I'm telling this story for another reason. I want Gary to hear this story, because the next chapter is what happened. Now, I had a lot of letters from students, and some of them are creative, and some of them are not very creative. Some of them are pretty much the old Dear John story or Sick Aunt or whatever. But you'll have to agree with me, I think, that was a fairly creative approach to trying to appeal this process. So I decided that I would write to him and tell him that it is possible to appeal a process, but you have to come up with some pretty good reasons. And then it goes before a faculty review committee, and they review and find out if they think that your submission can do it. So I told him the mechanism, and I sent him a form. It's a form he had to fill out. It was a fairly extensive form for him. So he decided to do it, and he completed his form and pointed out that he'd made good grades in high school, pointed out that he had the ability to do it, but also acknowledged that his motivation wasn't there the first year, that he was sorry about that, but he really would like to ask for a chance to come back and show that he could make it, because he hated to waste a year to sitting out and pumping gas and changing tires. So this form, I didn't try to interfere with the process, let this go to, not like the athletes or anything like that. let this form go to the faculty committee. They reviewed it and came back and decided they'd let him try it. And I'm pleased to tell you it worked. That's a case where that worked out, see. And he graduated not quite on schedule because he got a little bit behind with his first year. But there is a young man who will be a friend for a long time, and a young man that appreciates the system that gave him a chance to do it. And I think as we deal with young people, and all of us do that work in higher education, we have to take an individual interest in these people, and sometimes we need to have a provision for that kind of a young person, be it male or female, be it motivated or unmotivated, whatever the problem might be, because we really need all of those resources, and we don't need them as uneducated people. And I will tell you that I think we have some social reasons why we need to be involved in helping some underprivileged people go ahead and get educated and get off public welfare and get on meaningful employment. And I'm getting off a little bit on course here, Bob, but I just thought since I got off on this friend thing, I might share that. We may come back to that. You asked me to talk a little bit about the relationship of the Okmulgee campus with the mother campus, we'll say today, Stillwater campus. Don't know if all of you recognize this. Certainly Gary knows this very well because he deals with this in our budget. We have really 7 separate budgets for Oklahoma State University. First of all, we have 4 campuses that we work with, and Okmulgee is an important one. And it is the oldest of our non-Stillwater campuses. And you all know that. You're nearly half a century old. And then we have another campus in Oklahoma City. And we have a third campus in Tulsa, which is the College of Osteopathic Medicine. Each of those campuses have their own budgets. And so if you don't get enough money in your budget, please don't blame me. Blame your president down here, Vice President Bob Klobnis, and say, Bob, you're not speaking up loud enough to Gary Smith. And then Gary's in, see? I mean, I'm going to delegate that fund. No, seriously, the way that happens is you submit, your campus submits its budget to the state regents. And so does Oklahoma City, and so does the College of Osteopathic Medicine. Now, those are 3 separate campuses, but all an important part of Oklahoma State University. Then we have the Stillwater campus, and it has 4 separate budgets. The College of Veterinary Medicine has a separate budget. And by the way, it gets partial funding through other ways for the diagnostic lab and some other things, so that there's pieces to several of these besides the direct budget that Gary Smith works with. Then we have the College of Agriculture has 2 separate budgets of its own, one for the Ag Experiment Station, which has 16 branch stations scattered throughout Oklahoma. It looks at the geographic differences in soil types, moisture, and so forth. And then it has a separate budget for cooperative extension, which has cooperative extension offices in virtually every county, all 77 counties of Oklahoma. So those 2 budgets are with the College of Agriculture, and the Dean of the College of Agriculture is the director of the Ag Experiment Station and the director of cooperative extension. So he then deals directly with Gary Smith's office, and I can tell you some by way of legislators and so forth, for those separate budgets. And then we have sort of an umbrella budget that talks about all the rest of the campus at Oklahoma State University. And that budget then deals with all the graduate colleges and the graduate college, physical plant, and all the rest. So that's how that kind of comes together in one package that is different, I will say, than from most universities. I don't know, Gary, how many others you have that have multiple budgets, but not too many, I expect. And so that's a separate thing that I thought you should know as you think about how you put things together. Let me say that from my perspective, the kinds of things you're doing, which again from my perspective do represent a statewide mission, are a very, very important part of the whole of Oklahoma State University. Oklahoma State is a land-grant university that does have statewide mission. Virtually all extension services under our jurisdiction, so that's statewide. Ag Experiment Station, we have, I don't know how many farmers in Oklahoma, but I suppose a few 100,000 perhaps. And those farmers and producers are individually too small to do their own experiments, so they rely on the College of Agriculture and its experiment station to do that experimentation for them. And so we then look to that whole statewide mission. And of course, the public service side of the university is important, and you all are also involved in public service. Most of you know that OSU has just completed its first century of service to the people of Oklahoma. And we had indeed the centennial decade that we completed last December, where we had our 100th birthday, and then literally on Christmas Day was our 100th birthday last December. And as I say, you're approaching, Bob, your half-century mark. It won't be very many more years till you'll be at the half-century mark, and it's very timely that you're looking at a strategic planning exercise at this time as you prepare to enter your second half of the first century. I would say that my feedback across the state, that both OSU Stillwater and our Okmulgee campus have been progressive and serving the clientele that we missions to help serve. And strategic planning, and I'd like to say a few words about strategic planning because I think that's the hallmark of a productive and a progressive institution is to do strategic planning. So what happens in this process is we look at our mission, and Gary Smith did a nice job of highlighting some of these kind of things because they impact where we put priorities and where we put money. But as we develop our mission, we need to think of a broad umbrella. What is our main mission? And as a technical campus, what will be the things that we highlight? What are the trend lines? What are the things that are going to be important next year and 10 years from now and so forth? And will we get ourselves positioned to react and respond to those kind of things? That's part of our objectives and goals, of course, is to accomplish those kind of things. And along the way, there's a lot of environmental influence that come along that you have to take into account. But emerging opportunities, I think, are some of the people who have the vision, the people who have the ability to kind of find what that niche is and what that need is, and look at those emerging opportunities are the ones that are probably going to be able to focus and to set priorities and to head toward those directions. And even in times when we're short on funds, and I've been in higher education now nearly 40 years, all told, I guess I have, as a student. And I've never heard of a president or a dean or a department head or a director yet that said they had too much money. Have you, Gary? But Roy, you may have. I've never. So that's probably going to be something we'll have to live with for a long time, is at least the perceived notion that we're probably short on funds. So how do we set the priorities and how do we go about using this is pretty important. Well, that fact, the fact that we're just coming out of our centennial year, the fact that you're just now coming into about the halfway point in your first 100 years. And in our case, the fact that we are in the process of bringing online 2 new vice presidents, a new VP for research, who reports in today or tomorrow. I didn't have time to check on him today, but he's due in today, August 1st, who's coming to us from the University of Tennessee, a fellow who helped the University of Tennessee expand their federal and other sources of funding for research dramatically over the last 6 or 8 years. And the person that we're really proud to bring on the team, a fellow named Tom Collins, with that name real easy, is going to be, I think, a fine person. And I'm sure that along the way you'll get acquainted with him, because we want to get these 2 vice presidents out and meet the people, and we're going to be staging some special receptions for them, which are also going to sing in 2 places, but we're also going to ask them to get out and meet our other campus leaderships. And then, of course, the other position that we just filled that will be bringing Ray Bowen to us sometime early September is a new position that we created. Actually, it's another position. It was the Jay Boggs position that we've upgraded and given the title of provost to give it a clear indication that there's a little additional leadership in terms of academics to go with that position. And here we're bringing online a person who has really cut his teeth at a good university. He spent most of his professional career as an engineer at Rice University, which is one of our top line private universities in this country. And then more recently as Dean of Engineering at the University of Kentucky for 6 or 7 years. And then the last couple of years has been Assistant Director of the National Science Foundation's Engineering Department. So he's a person that's highly qualified, a person that I think we're extremely fortunate to get. And we're asking them to join with us, and on August the 16th and 17th, we will have a 2-day conference on strategic planning at the campus, university level. And your representative, of course, Bob, will be there to tell your story, and it's very timely. And I'm sure, Bob, you're going to benefit from preparing for that by having this conference here. And so I want to commend you all for doing that. Naturally, we're all looking at the kinds of things that we're getting in terms of leadership and directives from the state regents as they look to admission standards and graduation rates and retention rates and those things that we all know are very important as they look to articulation. And that's one that affects you and one that you should be thinking about as well as you look at strategic planning. The junior colleges, the other institutions in the state, how are we going to go about working out the program and course articulation? I think that's a very serious thing, and the parents and the students deserve to know ahead of time. We need to put together some better articulation arrangements and agreements so that we can have brochures and materials out to where the students will know what courses will and won't transfer and meet other requirements. And that is one that I know is a challenge for all of us. And we have started that process. In the 6 institutions that report to our board, we are working on that. But we've also Gary brought in some people down in your shop, and I think they have said, let's also try to bring in some junior college representatives. So that's something this next year that we're going to be giving more emphasis to as we do a comprehensive plan for Oklahoma State University. We are going to be active in this process, not passive. We're going to be active. We think it's important, it's timely, and I can tell you're serious about it or you wouldn't be here. But we must realize that the strategic planning is really a continuous process. It's a dynamic process. It's one that changes. It's one that's pervasive, and it should involve the whole. It needs to involve, must involve the whole. And so there are several important characteristics about strategic planning that I think are exciting. And it does give us a bit of a roadmap to follow. I also believe that it's important that we bring in, as we do these things, and we'll be doing that at the university level. We're going to ask the colleges to do it. We're going to ask the campuses to do it. And that is to figure out what your best role is in terms of responding to the needs of the people that hire your graduates, people that represent the business and industry and other government, other agencies where your graduates are employed. My notion is that we do, as a public institution, have a clear-cut mandate to be involved in the growth and development of the economics of our state. We're lucky. Gary talked about the fact that there are a lot of states, I'm told over 30 states this year, that are not going to balance a budget. That doesn't bode well for any part of the agency, education or otherwise. And I personally know several presidents that are dealing with budgets this year that are taking as much as 10 and 15% base budget reductions. Base budget reductions, no new money. There's some that's taken up upwards of 20%. Base budget reductions, and several that are above 10, double digits. Think about that. And some of them are now into the third year of this. And today someone said that they'd heard that Michigan, for example, was saying to their people, look at it for the rest of the decade. So we're talking about some serious matters, and that makes it all more important that we do strategic planning, that we do focusing. We try to zero in on the things that are most important to us and most important to the state. But I'm a believer that if we're going to have leading programs at Okmulgee, and you name them because you've got a couple of dozen very important programs there, but if you automotive, whatever, and accounting, and computers and so forth, CAD/CAM and so forth, if you're going to have leading programs in these areas, you need to be a partner. From my perspective, you need to be a partner with the practitioners of those arts and crafts and skills. And that's where I think we fit in with the economic development thing. And I know you're doing a lot of that, but I want to commend you for considering how you can do more of that. As you go through this process, I'm sure you're talking about identifying some important areas, thrust areas, if you will, and then assessing your assets and strengths and weaknesses, if you will, the challenges, the opportunities to deal with those kinds of things. And of course, enrollments, present and potential, those are important to all of us. They impact budget quite a little bit. We talk about that a lot in the budget committee, don't we, Gary, is that what enrollments are doing. And of course, budgets are something that all of us flinch just a little bit about because we wonder how it's going to affect us. Placement, internships, and co-op programs, those are all important. And I know you're dealing with those kinds of things. And assessment, Gary mentioned assessment. We'll be hearing lots more about assessment. Where's our consultant back here? I bet you're hearing a whole lot about assessment these days around the country. So are we. And there's quite a few schools that are into it fairly deep, and we need to benefit by their experiences. And, also calling on the help of those who've been around those programs and helped consult with those programs. We're going to need a lot of flexibility. I think the word change is a word that's been mentioned a lot, and it's going to be mentioned a lot more. We're going to be talking about a lot more non-traditional students. And you've got quite a few, I think, Bob, that come through your program that I would call non-traditional students. Many of them are older students, working parents, and so forth that certainly fit that category. Accreditation is something we'll be dealing a lot with, too, regionally and nationally. The whole area of dissemination of new technologies, and this is one of course, you can be highly involved in, and should be. There's quite a few places that I think we need to link closer, by we, I mean us at the Stillwater campus with our technical campuses in Okmulgee in terms of disseminating new technologies that are coming down the pipeline through our engineering and other areas. Naturally, libraries and other resources. Library costs, I'm told by librarians, are really going up rapidly. The cost of journals, the cost of periodicals, the cost of books. Many have been increasing 15, 20, and more percent a year for the last several years. And what that has amounted to is that many of the librarians are having to cut back. And they've had to set priorities too on which ones they're having to ask the colleges, departments, which journals do you want? We don't have enough money to buy them all. And that's a serious matter. We're having to look at those. And how can we link libraries together in the state? And I know we're looking at ways and means to access library materials at OU and TU and other places and make ours available. And I know that state regions are pushing for that as they get the fiber optics and other things online. So my belief is that library materials and library resources are going to be something that we need to get pretty serious about. The whole of education is going to be very competitive. We compete for state dollars with Common Ed, with Go Tech, and we compete with also, I will tell you, with Human Health and State Highway Patrol and Park System and everything else. They're all these agencies that are looking for state money and state support are all in a competitive mode. And so we've got to do a good job, I think, of serving the public out there and being perceived as very, very important. And I commend Go Tech. I think, Roy, you guys have done a hell of a job, excuse the French there, of telling your story. Not only telling the story, but doing the thing, which is relating to business industry. So many times I hear about when new business looking to come to Oklahoma, they say, well, we're here to get one of the best Go Tech systems in the country. So we need to do more, I think, of telling our story out there and marketing good things that are happening at Okmulgee and elsewhere. Over the several years that I've been here now, 3+ years, I'm in my 4th year now, I've seen several things that come and go, but one of the things that I'm the most excited about that this institution has expressed an interest in being a part of is an Aviation Alliance program in the northeastern Oklahoma area. And that program involves, 5 or 6 institutions, Bob. Votech, involves one Votech, a couple of 2-year schools. This particular institution involves TJC, UCT, and OSU. And next week, coming off the press, I just saw the galleys this morning, as a matter of fact. There'll be a new brochure that will tell about this program. It'll be available next Monday, that talks about the Aviation Education Alliance program that involves these various institutions. And it's going to be next for the media. There's going to be a major announcement of this whole on the 16th of August, that you probably already know about, out at the airport. And Senator Bourne will be there and a lot of other dignitaries. And I'm pleased that this institution has expressed an interest in that. And I don't know if you talked about it, Bob, yet or not, and where it fits into your strategic planning, but I hope you do. If you haven't, I hope that that'll be a part of your discussion, because I fully believe that the aerospace aviation industry in Oklahoma is headed for a growth industry. And we ought to be a part of that. And this institution now has expressed interest in that, and I think should be a part of that. Well, in all these programs, in all these areas, of course, one of the big things is human resources. How we go about developing human resources, that really is the challenge for us. And students, that means we're centered around students. Naturally, our needs for more equipment, our needs for additional facilities, and upgraded facilities, those are all important, but basically the important thing, bottom line, is how we go about preparing, attracting, educating, preparing students. And I'm talking about a stronger base of some certain categories. Women, I think you can get a little more aggressive or assertive. Some people don't use the word aggressive, use assertive, so be a little more assertive in recruiting more women into your programs. I think you have an opportunity to do a little better job in retaining some of the groups. My notion is I see some of the data, Larry, that you do a pretty good job of recruiting minorities, for example, but the graduation rates of them is something to be desired. And so I'm not here to chastise you on that. I'm here to challenge you on it and tell you I think there's a chance that you can improve and get that retention up on minority programs. And if that means some additional remedial classes, I encourage you to do that, because I think not just because they're a category that hasn't in the past had the educational opportunities and maybe haven't taken advantage of them, But the social justice aspect, the fact that we need to get these people into the mainstream workforce is important. And we all need to pitch in and do it together. And so I challenge you there. One of the things that I think you ought to look at is the possibility of using additional student tutors. Your own students. Not that you want to say you can hire students cheap, but you can. I mean, that's the bottom line is they need jobs. And it's a good experience for them to be involved in helping other people, and a lot of them like to do that. But to put together a student corps of tutors, I think is good. We're going to be asking a lot of our retirees to join in that kind of a thing. Volunteer help. A lot of retirees would love to give a few hours a week. I've met with these retirees. We have 150 or so of them in the Stillwater community, and I've met with these groups fairly periodically, very frequently, and they want to do something. And I said to them, okay, one of the things you can do is help us help some of the students that have some academic deficiencies. And they said, we're willing to do that. If you'll provide us an office, space, we can put a few books, we'll do that. And so we're looking at ways and places right now that we can do that. I hope that you'll do that as well. Another area for us, and I haven't looked at the statistics for you all on this one, Bob, but I know that we are short on minority faculty members. Well below half of the percentage we have of students, minority students. So if our minority student population is 10%, and it's not quite that, our faculty population is more like 3 or 4% of the total minority. We've got to work hard on that. And I don't know where you are. Like I say, I haven't looked at your data, but I would guess that you're probably could grow some there too. So, and I encourage you to do that. We need to get, I think, more creative with our summer sessions. There's some opportunities there. And we're going to do that. And starting in 92, we're going to offer a big selection, major selection change in the weeks. We've been too much into what's happened in the past must be the right thing. So we've had an 8-week summer session, and not worrying too much whether we start that summer session before school's out some places, because we got a lot of teachers that want to go to summer school. Well, beginning in 92, and I've forgotten whether it's a 10-week or a 12-week span, but we're going to expand that, and we're going to put together a lot of packages of 2, 3, 4-week packages, so people can come for short times, longer times, and a much longer time if they want, with a 10 or 12-week package. We're hoping that we can generate considerably more enrollment that way, and that the enrollment through the tuition and so forth we collect will pay those summer instructors. So that we hope it will be essentially a pay its own way type thing. I shouldn't be saying that with Gary listening in, but that's what we have in mind. And maybe over ambitious, but we've been told that we have a good many people who want to go to summer school, but our past summer program is not fitted their program. So we've got to be more flexible, I guess is another thing. My time is up. Thank you much.
I was just thinking when the president was talking and thinking about what Gary said and what Dr. Campbell has said, I hope all of you are hearing some echoes about what we've talked about today so far and some of the points that they've emphasized, because as you've worked through the process that you've gone through, you've raised some of the issues, and so they're extending those, and that's encouraging. The next individual to speak to us is the Director of Vocational Technical Education for the state of Oklahoma, and that's Dr. Roy Peters. I remember, Roy, when I was hired, and John went before the Policy and Personnel Committee after I'd been on campus, and at that time, Carolyn Savage was chairing it, and Senator Ed Long was chairman of the Regents, and Burl Killian was there, and Robbie Robbins, and Gerald Chesney. And they have, Carolyn gave me a list, I think, of 24 questions, and she said, start at the top. We're not going to interrupt you and answer these questions. And then when we got all finished, she said, we have one more question, and we have one more directive to you if we hire you for this job, in that there's going to be improved cooperation between vocational technical education and OSU Okmulgee. And I guess I answered it right. At least they ended up offering me the job. But I never will forget that in terms of that was a very high priority at that time with the OSU Regents in terms of increasing that cooperation. And I think that when Francis was the director of VOTEC, we were able to initiate the discussions and get some things going. And I feel very good about the continued kind of cooperation that we've had with the Department of Vocational Technical Education since Roy has become the director. And I think there's probably, and maybe I'm overstating this, but I think there's probably no other institution in the system of higher education in Oklahoma that has more reason to work in many different cooperative ways and cooperative ventures with the State Department of Vocational and Technical Education and the area vocational technical schools than our institution. I think we have a lot in common and many ways in which we can complement one another. So, Roy, we're anxiously waiting to hear you talk.
Well, we've had the better deal this afternoon because we've been up moving around and get a little exercise, and you all have been stuck in here, and I really don't know of anything I can do for you. I wish I have anything for you. How's that? And, but I will try to be as brief as possible and yet cover the subject. Bob not only answered that question right verbally, but I think he answered the question correctly in terms of his performance. About the time he came in was about the time I was to become state director, and the few months before I was at the State Department as associate state director, and Dr. Tuttle called me over to his office and said he had someone there to visit with him, and he thought I might want to sit in. And it was Bob Klobenish, and Bob, I think, really kind of opened the session by saying that he was very interested in establishing a working relationship with vocational technical education, and what could we suggest that he might do that would allow a linkage to occur between the area tech schools, or graduates, for example, and what were we then? Okmulgee Tech, I guess, at the time. And Dr. Tuttle responded very simply. He said, Bob, the first thing I'd recommend you do is to come to an area tech school superintendent's meeting. They're meeting a week from Tuesday in some place, and you should come. And I was there, I think, when you walked in the door, and you would have thought it was a long-lost relative. They didn't know who Bob Klobenish, the man, was, but they knew who the position represented. And it was, I think, a friendship between the two systems that has endured. And area school superintendents think a lot of your director. They believe that his heart's in the right place. They think that his mission is to complement their mission. I can tell you that they do not feel threatened or competitive with OSU Okmulgee, and Bob and many of you in this room have gone a long way to cause that relationship to develop, and I hope to be a part of making it continue to grow even stronger and stronger. We are, as most of you I think know, a pretty unique system of vocational technical education. I'm the incoming president of the National Association of State Directors, and one of the things I have to remind myself of is that I'm kind of a unique bird in that bunch. My counterpart in Kansas, Tom Moore, is the assistant state superintendent for vocational technical education. In Texas, my counterpart is the associate commissioner for vocational education. Both those people are in the Department of Education. In Colorado, my counterpart is the vice chancellor for higher ed. And so there are various configurations. Every state has a state director, but we're unique in that we have this freestanding, autonomous, board-governed state agency that is responsible for just VOTEC. And as we deal in our world, we find that to be tremendously advantageous in that we have a single mission. We know what we are about. We are able to tell people no when they call us and say that we've been studying organization of government and believe that you ought to take over driver education. And sometimes these people in call are very, very powerful, and we say, now, what is it that has caused you to think of us when you thought that of driver education? Well, clearly you're in the business of putting people to work. That's correct. Clearly, if you can't drive, you can't get to work. and therefore we think we ought to take over education. It almost seems logical at times. And literally a week later, this was about my first month as director, literally a week later, a lady, a very powerful person in Oklahoma, called and said that she had been to a conference on foreign language, and since we were entering an age of international competitiveness, clearly it could be logical that the role of vocational technical education in Oklahoma could easily be expanded to assume all of the responsibilities of teaching foreign language K-12 in the school systems of the state of Oklahoma. And I got some really weird ones that I could add on, you know, if you wanted me to. Well, we turn all those deals down, and so far we've been fortunate in being able to turn all those deals down, because we don't think that's any of our business. As I said, we try to remain singularly focused on the mission of vocational technical education. And in doing so, I think historically we have sort of been able to find our market niche, if you will, in our segment of the population. But as we enter the 1990s, I believe that our world has significantly changed in figuring out what your niche is. And while I have told those two stories to illustrate the bizarreness of some of the things we're asked to do, it may be that one of these days, foreign language, for example, may become a perfectly logical part of vocational technical education, just as physics and just as algebra and just as biology and chemistry instruction are beginning to be in today's time. So it is most appropriate, I think, that we get together with higher education, and particularly with a kindred spirit such as this technical institute is, to talk about ways that we can have relationships. When we were during sort of an interim period with chancellors, I went to the interim chancellor and said, you know, we've gone through a lot of divisiveness in education, particularly between vocational education and higher education. The two systems suit each other in the Supreme Court years ago, as many of you recall. And we have had all sorts of criticisms of duplication. And I said the premise that I'd like to begin working on is that we're not going to close. We're not going to bulldoze down any institutions in this state. The Aerial Tech schools are too strong. Politically, they're strong. They're popular with business and industry. They're popular with the people. And nobody's going to close even one down, much less the entire system. Nobody's going to close a community college or a technical institute, as Gary said, or a university in this state. It's just not going to happen in our careers. And while we may wish that we had a couple of hundred common school districts as opposed to then over 600, we may have some school consolidation, but we're not going to have massive wholesale closing of public schools. Therefore, Mr. Chancellor, why could we not enter into arrangements based on the fact that these institutions are there and that we need to do our part as education leaders to ensure that there is as limited amount of duplication, that there is as much cooperation, and that there is as much coordination as could possibly ever exist between the three entities of education. Well, those of you that know Dan Hobbs know that that's the spirit that the man operated his entire career with. And we embarked, and when Chancellor Brish came in, he embraced that what I think is basically a new feeling. Not that old chancellors and old state directors were not good people with good hearts and good administrators, but at least this moment we felt there was an opportunity to work cohesively and cooperatively together. It probably doesn't hurt that I have announced to everybody I can announce to that we do not want, we do not wish, we do not ever hope for the ability to grant college credit in area tech schools. And the reason we don't is because I'm a taxpayer. And as a taxpayer, I would be offended personally if we were to install 48 brand new junior colleges overnight in this state. And that's exactly what would happen if we were to allow Aeryville Tech Schools to grant college credit. So I'm willing to sort out that niche to higher education and to recognize that the role of vocational technical education does not, should not, will not include the granting of college credit. That said, however, I am a great advocate of competency-based education. And I don't think it for most of us as educators, makes a hill of beans where one learns something. If you're in a room at Western Hills Lodge, or if you're in a classroom at Tulsa Junior College, or a classroom at OSU Okmulgee, or at the main campus, or or out in real life, as long as that competency is learned, that we should be able to allow students the opportunity to receive some sort of recognition for that through a credit system. And a simple example of that all of us can relate to, if a person comes to you and says, I have had typing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 in high school, why in the world would we want to stick that person in typing 1? And generally we give that student some sort of credit. So I think we have to recognize that reality as well. What we have wanted with higher education is the same kind of relationship that we have with the high schools of the state. We don't give high school credit in the Aeryville Tech Schools. Many of you may not know that, but if you go to Tulsa Aeryville Tech as a high school student, as 11th and 12th grade student, the credit that you're given for electronics or the computer class or welding or whatever, that credit is given back at Tulsa McLean High School or Tulsa Memorial High School or Tulsa Washington, or wherever the student has come from. The relationship then is that the vocational school is really an extension of the home high school in terms of their curriculum. And their courses are accredited and valued, if you will, by somebody, the state or the accrediting agency, as appropriate to be offered for high school credit. And that's the kind of relationship that through the cooperative agreements that some of you are involved in, that we're hoping to develop even further and further for adults who are enrolled in our Aeryville Tech School system. Remember, we're not giving the credit, but those students in the business and office program at Central Tech that are enrolled in the business and office class there are receiving college credit through you, through this cooperative agreement. And our opinion is that that's a great deal for both institutions, but especially it's a great deal for the student for 2 counts. One, they're going to get a ticket at the end, an associate degree at the end. But the other, and what we really like, is that in this age of more sophisticated skill requirements that are out there in whatever field you and I are dealing with, that the student is also enticed, if you will, into taking the related academic courses through your institutions, not through ours, but through your institutions that will make them a better person and a better employer, a better employee, and a better, a more productive worker, because they have the ability to communicate, to calculate, to understand scientific principles because they've had that general education course. So we hope that as you have done, I mean, we could not ask for a better bell cow, if you will, than OSU Okmulgee in leading the way to work with Aeryville Tech Schools to establish the quality cooperative enrollments. And we know the onus of all that is on your backs. You're the ones that are going to have to defend accreditation. You're the ones that are going to have to defend the scrutiny and to ensure that those programs for which you're giving credit in your institution that are being taught at the Aeryville Tech School site are of a quality that will allow you to maintain your standards and your image and your reputation in this state and in your community and in the community of higher education. So we take that responsibility very, very seriously. One of the things, though, that we think this all leads to, and of course now the government's even legitimatized all this with the concept of tech prep, is an ability to allow students to have more of a sequenced, more coherent course of study. I spoke yesterday to a group of high school math teachers who were in a workshop that we're conducting on applied math, the teaching of applied math. Incidentally, we've had about 200 math teachers this summer for extensive training sessions so that they can convert from old math teachers to new math teachers. And we think the applied math, the applied physics, the applied biology chemistry course are literally going to do revolutionary things for kids, as they are, we think, for your institution and for our institutions as well. But essentially what we're hoping will happen is that the enrollment in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 will decline dramatically. And that's probably going to shock Dr. Campbell and Dr. Smith. But as you and I both know, we've got a bunch of kids that we've shoved into Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and even physics that not only don't belong there, they're not doing well in there at all. One of the guys in this group yesterday was a 25-year math teacher who really grilled me after we got through, and he said, you know, we told you administrators 20 years ago that you were doing the wrong thing by shoving all these kids in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And he said, I've had to water down my algebra course so much because I like my job. You know, I got tenure, but you can't flunk half the kids in your class. And so we have forced kids, frankly because of college admission requirements, to go through this same set of courses that have caused a situation where nobody is getting what they need. The really good kids that can understand the abstractness of real physics or the abstractness of Algebra 1 and 2 and are ready for that kind of learning are not getting what they want because of the multitude of students in there that are being shoved in there by counselors and parents, so they'll be ready to meet the admission standards of the universities. What we think the applied courses will have done is to reach those Dale Parnell's neglected majority, that huge mass of good kids that probably, like my daughter, didn't take 2 semesters of physics because it was boring and hard. And she needs physics. She would be a good physics student were she to have an opportunity available to her to take an applied physics course. And that course is being increasingly offered in more and more institutions. This applied math that we were talking about has all the learner outcomes that are in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 class. Take applied math 1, applied math 2, you've got the learner outcomes. And what's wrong with kids learning the same content of course structure that is in algebra, but just taught in a different manner? And you that are in the technical fields have been doing that beautifully for years and years and years, and unfortunately we in vocational education, you in technical education, have generally had to bootleg and to weave that into the courses that we're teaching, into the physics into the automotive program, as opposed to having companions over here in the academic world that are helping to reach these great students. And my drill on all that is, what we got to lose? You know, what we're doing ain't working. You know, half the kids that go to OSU that are qualified to get in, even that meet the ACT requirements, not just OSU, but Northeastern over here at Tahlequah or at Southwestern. Half the kids can't pass or can't make a satisfactory grade in college algebra. And those are kids that have had the courses. So obviously we are not reaching enough students to be successful, and we think one of the things that will help you and to help the university system and to help the students as they go into the aerial tech schools are that they have those academic skills that will make them more valued employees. we're just seeing some really neat things happen. I think it's interesting that those of us in vocational technical education are involved in things like this, but we've been integrating applied math and applied physics into appropriate vocational programs, and that's most of them, by the way, particularly in T&I for the last 3 years. This last fall I was in a electricity class at Eastern Oklahoma County Area Tech School. And this statement doesn't say much for our sex equity efforts, but there were 16 old boys in there, and they were just about as typical of T&I voc ed students as you'd, if you ever wanted to stereotype, that would have been a photograph to be made in heaven. It came right out of Herod, Jones, Luther, and John. And I walked in, and they were at their desks. Now, I knew that I needed to get there during the first part of the 3-hour segment, but they were at tables just as you are here. And those guys were absolutely making scientific calculators hum with sophisticated algebra problems. I mean, it was really a demonstration that was unbelievable. And these kids weren't rocket scientists. You know, they'd come to Votech school to take electricity. So first thing that happened, the instructor came up to me, and I thought he was going to knock me down, and he said, before you say anything, let me warn you not to use the word algebra in this room. And he said, these kids will drop out of my class if they think they're doing algebra problems, you know. Well, we followed up on those kids, and they've done a great job throughout the rest of the year. One of the things that I just want to kind of close that segment off with is that I asked the electricity instructor after the class, I said, you know, he teaches 30 minutes of applied math a day and 30 minutes of applied physics a day, and then I guess back then it was 2 days a week. He works in 30 minutes of applied communication, because his drill is they'll need to be able to communicate with the customer, with the technical reps, et cetera, et cetera. So we need those communication skills. So I asked this guy, I said, you know, you're a hardcore T&I guy, and you know, it wouldn't have been long ago that you would have told me, or your counterparts would have told me, that you don't have time to fool with stuff like this. That any time that you take away from the typical teaching of electricity, that your kids are getting cheated. He said, yeah, but he said, times have changed. He said, guys that can string wire and hang light fixtures and put in wall plugs are either going to be a dime a dozen or they're going to be unemployed. He said, what my industry really needs right now is the worker that can calculate the center of the room and the center of an irregular shaped room and the spacing of light fixtures, and can calculate the number of light fixtures that are needed and the voltage and the wattage, and can do the math that is required for the trade, and have the knowledge of physics and Ohm's law, etc., that is necessary in order to survive in our industry. And I see that as a very, very common mentality among those quality vocational teachers, and we hope we're getting rid of those that are not and bringing in those that are, those quality vocational teachers that understand that there is a great deal more to the reality of the workplace out there that involves the application of academics than perhaps has ever been present in the past. Well, what does all that do for us, VOTEC and for OSU Okmulgee? Well, I think it does a great deal. First of all, I hope you'll recognize that daily we're changing the level of our vocational technical program, just as you have changed. And one of the things that I'll compliment you on, and I'm sure it must have been painful, is that if you look at OSU Okmulgee today versus 5 years ago, you're looking at a substantially different institution. And I would say to those that have probably gone on because they couldn't bear that to happen, that had you not changed that much, and had we not changed that much in area vocational schools, we would have been history. We would have been gone. We absolutely would not have this reputation that we have. But we have recognized that that worker out there needs to have a different set of skills. Our future is to continue to find ways to link programs together, to see that the high school experience that students have in applied math, applied physics, applied biology, chemistry, applied communications can link together with 2 years of vocational education while the students in high school, where they have job readiness and the ability for continued learning, where they don't have to make a choice between going to the job. I just hate people who talk about college prep kids versus VOTEC kids or work readiness kids or whatever. We don't need to force kids to make that kind of choice. The workplace is not going to allow that to happen. We don't need to be choice limiters in our respective institutions. We need to be choice creators, and kids that come through the appropriate vocational technical program linked with a rigorous academic program. We can't let them take junk. We've got to get them in the right kinds of related courses and prepare them then to continue on for post-secondary education, either in our institutions as post-secondary students, but I think in increasing numbers in your institution. And I think if you'll define your mission to embrace those quality kids, those caliber of kids that we're talking about, and help us get those students prepared, that you will continue to be a premier technical institute in this state. I think I probably outworn my welcome, but I will say one thing, one last thing that I think is very, very important. I also see an increasingly important role for your institution in helping us with our teachers. And this I wish I could say this where it didn't sound like there was any criticism cast toward any other kind of higher education institution, because I surely don't mean it. But let's take a program that you don't even offer, because I think it is so vivid. We're converting our ag teachers as we speak from production ag. We don't need to train 20,000 little future farmers anymore, but there are vibrant businesses out there in agribusiness arenas and agri-science areas for which we have some major responsibilities for. Well, what we're doing is we're having to convert about 450 hardcore ag guys and about 6 women, I think, into new kinds of teachers. And some of those guys are really hardcore. They really are. You know, those dually 4-wheel drive dual cab pickups are religious symbols to them. And what the hell you can do with a dually pickup if you're